Welcome. My name is Dennis Dill, and I'm going to do a presentation today on the Bolingbrook Community Garden. The Bolingbrook Community Garden is located near Hidden Lakes Nature Center, and also if you ever go to the Hidden Lakes Trout Pond, you go by the community garden. Gardening, if done correctly, can provide great pleasure, and your efforts can produce healthy food to eat. This is my 8th year at the garden plots. I welcome the idea of having a plot that I can grow vegetables, as I did not have the room at my home. I'm not a master gardener, but have applied things I've learned over the years to grow vegetables. I hope to share what I have learned with you so you can successfully grow and harvest vegetables for your family. Plots can be rented at the BRAC on Lindsay Drive. A single plot 10 by 10 is $35. 2 or more plots are $30 each. Raised beds are $45 each. Unfortunately, they are sold out for 2021. If you go to the BRAC and you sign up for a garden plot, you'll be given something that looks like a contract, and in that contract will be the rules. The copy you see on the screen is old rules, but they haven't really changed. A couple of things got updated, but most of the rules are just common sense rules. This is a look at the community garden plots. The plots are rototilled and ready for gardeners to begin planting. This is another view showing one of the raised beds, and the raised beds are sold out for 2021. What is needed to get started? Fencing. Chicken wire does a nice job. Use cable ties to attach to the existing posts. If regular fencing is used, you may need to use some chicken wire about 12 inches from the bottom to keep the rabbits from getting into your garden. The posts provided are 10 feet apart. You might want to purchase some small posts to put in between to secure your fence to give it more stability. Rabbits did eat through some rubber fencing, so chicken wire regular fencing is what is recommended. What tools do you need for gardening? The first thing you'd need is a hoe. This will be the most important tool you will use. I prefer a 3-pronged hoe because it does a nice job of stirring up the soil. A garden rake, a shovel, big and small, stakes and a string, a watering can, tape measure or a yardstick or a planting board. You might ask, what is a planting board? A planting board is just a piece of wood that you have marked increments on. For example, you could mark 1-inch increments, and then if your seed packet says plant the seeds 3 inches apart, you lay the board down and put the seed every 3 inches. And if you grow tomatoes, I recommend using tomato cages. Otherwise, the tomato vines will go everywhere. You'll need tags to mark what you plant and where. When you use seeds, you want to mark, where your rows are, and then by using stakes and strings and leaving them in the ground until your plants come up, helps you identify what's a plant and what's a weed. Next, we're going to talk about planting a garden. You need to work the soil, rototill or by hand with a shovel, rake, and hoe. You need to plan where to plant. Allow room for your plants to grow. Draw a diagram of what you're going to grow and plant according to your plan. This is a picture of a garden layout that I used once, and this is for a 10 by 10 plot, and it just marks where you're going to plant your vegetables. Now you're ready to start gardening. When to plant. Early cold hardy plants, broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, radishes, peas, sunflowers, eggplant, onions, and carrots can all go in the ground early. The gardens open April 15th, and as we've experienced this week, we've had some severely cold weather, but these kind of plants would be able to survive that kind of weather. After the danger of frost, you can plant tomatoes, zucchini, yellow squash, peppers, corn, and okra. Now's a good time to discuss what plants do I want to purchase and what plants do I want to grow from seed. Most of your bigger plants, you can buy plants for example, the broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi are all, eggplant also, are plants that can grow. The growing season's not long enough. You would want to buy plants, and that way you can place them in your garden, and you will be able to harvest them at the end of the season. Other items such as your radishes and carrots and onions, you can plant from seed, although I would recommend if you're growing table onions that you buy onion sets. After frost, you can plant the plants listed, such as tomatoes or zucchini, yellow squash, peppers, corn, and okra. Green beans need a soil temperature of at least 55 degrees. I would wait until mid-May to plant my green beans because they'll just lay in the soil, and the germination percentage is a lot lower if they've been laying in the soil for a while. So I wait until the soil warms up and plant my green beans. How to plant. For purchased plants, you dig a hole, add compost or other enriched soil, water the hole, place the plant in the hole and cover with dirt. Water every couple of days. For seeds, I use the stakes and string, make a V trench to the depth shown on the seed packet, cover with soil. You can add compost or other enriched soil, and water. Leave the string in place to mark the rows. Okay, we're going to talk about planting the garden here. A couple of our volunteers are planting tomatoes for the food pantry project, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I want to point out, you see next to the tray of tomatoes, there's what looks to be a water bottle. It's filled with ground up eggshells, and that's almost pure calcium. And you put that in the hole. And then also next to it is a bottle containing Epsom salts. And you sprinkle a little bit of that in the hole also. Your tomatoes will love having both of those items to make them nice and strong and give you good results. And here the gardeners are planting peppers, and they're putting them in what I call them mini raised beds, and they're just raised beds. I add garden soil to them, and it just keeps things a little more organized and a little easier to weed, and it has an aesthetic value to see your garden looking like that. And we'll have plenty of examples of that later on. Okay, here's the final results of a day of planting. As you can see, everything is in. We've got the tomato cages on, and we've watered the plants. So now what? Well, water plants every few days if there's no rain. There are 2,000-gallon tanks for your use. Keep the soil over the seeds moist until the plants appear. Then water every few days. Weed your garden. I can't emphasize this enough. A day after it rains, use your hoe to go in and break up the soil around your plants and kill the weeds. Weeds are easy to eliminate when they're small. If you do nothing, they will take over your garden. And we'll show you an example of that later on. Fertilize. I apply a small amount of fertilizer a couple of times during the season. You don't need to fertilize every week. Here's a picture of one of the water tanks. There's one at each end of the garden. And also, the Bolingbrook Garden Club and the local Boy Scouts built and donated 4 water carts. We have 2 by each tank. And you use a pail or a 5-gallon bucket, and you fill the cart, you pull it to your garden, and you put your watering can underneath and turn that red knob. Now, you can also hook a hose up to it and water your garden that way. This is the compost area. Compost is generated by the gardens and is to be used for the gardens to enrich the soil after it's broken down. We also have a Bolingbrook resident that grows microgreens, and he changes his soil every time that he harvests, which is, I think it takes 2 weeks for microgreens to grow. He sells them at a farmer's market, and then he brings the leftover soil and he puts it into the compost heap. And this is just good. It's a potting mix, actually. And so we mix that in with the compost, and it's really a good thing to put on your garden. Okay, this is my garden. I've had the same plot pretty much for 8 years. I started out with 1 plot. I now have 3. And I'm going to show you a couple of stages of the garden just to give you an idea of how things will progress. On the left, you see that I have my many raised beds, and I have onions and other plants in there. And then I have 2 rows of green beans that you can see, and I have next to it 2 rows of green beans that are just coming up. The reason that you see the 2 rows, I looked at the package after I planted, and I had pole beans. Well, pole beans can grow to be 10 feet tall and need something to climb on, so I had to scramble to come up with something in the middle of my garden for the beans to climb on. The others are bush beans. They'll probably get 12 inches high, and they're very good beans, but they're not like, they don't grow like pole beans. But what you see in the middle is broccoli, and on the closest to you would be the cabbage. On the right-hand screen, I have onions in a raised bed, and then I have, I love to grow tomatoes, so I have tomatoes all caged up and ready to fill up the cages, and by the end of the season, they will. If you look over just at the end of the raised bed, you'll see a small tomato plant. Well, that's a red cherry tomato, and we'll talk about them a little later on. Okay, we're going to fast forward. It's now June 16th, and my pole beans are taking off, and I put up a fence that's probably 36 inches, and they're climbing. So now I've got to figure out what to do for the rest of it. And this is a picture of the broccoli and the cabbage. And the cabbage I grew from seed for the first time in my cold frame, and I'll show you what a cold frame is later in the presentation. And I was quite pleased at how well the cabbage did grow. It was a lot of fun. One of the things, I put things fairly close together, and I need to kind of put more space in between, because as the leaves develop, they'll cover the ground, and then weeds can't grow where it's dark. So that's one reason I kind of keep things close together. But next year, or this season, I'm going to spread my plants out a little bit more. So this is the garden on the 9th of July, and you can see everything is really going to town. And my cabbage is headed up, and I got barely enough space to walk there. But in the lower right-hand corner, you see what I've done with my pole beans. And this picture here is a bigger picture of the same thing. I put string up, and by the 1st of August, those pole beans were to the top of the string, and there was quite a harvest of beans on the pole beans, and I will be growing them again this year, and I'm already trying to figure out, other than using the twine, what I can do. I'll probably put another row of fencing to give them something to climb on. But they were really a lot of fun to grow, and I'm going to do it again this year. Okay, West Suburban Community Pantry is a pantry that services the western suburbs. They do it out of a small location, and it's kind of behind the ice center that's on 53, and in a little warehousing area back there. They hand out food 3 days a week, and I believe they service about 500 customers a week out of this. They also have mobile pantries that they go to local churches, and they hand out food there. They approached the Bolingbrook Park District to see if anyone at the community garden would be interested in growing vegetables for donation. Well, the Park District got a hold of me, and we got the garden club involved, and we started growing, donating all of our vegetables that we grew to the community pantry. And so with the garden club, the Park District, working with the community pantry and the volunteers, we set out to see how much produce that we could grow, and the Park District gave us some extra spaces to do that. So this is the results, probably early August, of the various types of produce that were ready, and we took over. You can see tomatoes, green beans, some yellow squash, and on the right are some of the cherry tomatoes, and we also have some sweet peppers and hot peppers. More of the same. Okay, I was taking over towards the latter part of August. Every 2 or 3 days, boxes of tomatoes, like the one that you see on the left, over to the pantry. At the end of the year, we had donated 570 pounds of fresh produce to the pantry. And they were very appreciative of our efforts to do that. I'm going to show you pictures from other gardens just to give you an idea of how some of the other gardeners plan their gardens. This is Christine's garden. She's a member of the garden club, and always does a real nice job. Just a real simple garden with tomatoes and some. She's even got corn growing along the fence there. This is Jim's garden. Jim started gardening at the community garden 2 years ago, and over the winter he did a lot of reading about gardening and planting his garden, and so he came and last year and had a new design, and I think he started out with 2 plots the first year, and here he has 4 plots, and really did a nice job of designing his garden and put wood chips down in the walkways. And you can see his tomatoes in the right screen. He used bamboo poles rather than tomato cages. Here's another gardener, Karen, and she expanded from 1 space to 2 last year, and is growing lettuce and beans and onions. And in the corner, you'll see milkweed. The previous year, she had grown milkweed. This year, she didn't plant any milkweed seed. It came up on its own. And the milkweed is there for the monarch butterflies. This is a first-time gardener. And as you can see, I think she copied Jim's way of gardening, but she had an 11-year-old daughter, and both of them really enjoyed coming to the garden and learning about gardening and doing the work and the watering and harvesting that it takes, and they just had a great time. This year, I wanted to have a totally separate garden for tomatoes for the garden club, so we secured one, and I planted 27 tomatoes plants in a 10 by 10 spot. And the lady that helped me from the garden club says, "Don't you think we're putting them a little close together?" And I said, "Well, let's give it a try." So we did. And so here, all of them were caged up, and over against the fence, I put a little squash plant, or I'm sorry, that was zucchinis. And then I had a yellow squash on the other end. Well, the squash took over and went into tomatoes and everything else. And this is the garden on the 19th of June, and everything is going along nicely. You can see the zucchini and the squash. By June 26th, a comment was made, "Gee, this is becoming a jungle." And by July 9th, it was a jungle. But we were able to get at the tomatoes and harvest them, and we had a great crop of tomatoes. And so we were really pleased. Well, I put them together that close. Maybe I'll spread them out a little bit, but I won't plant the zucchini and the squash in the same garden. That was just a little too much. So this is one of the gardens, other than the tomato garden, for the Bolingbrook Garden Club. And we expanded. We had 2. We went to 3. And on this end of the garden, I planted beans. And they really struggled this year. And I had trouble in my own garden also. But along the fence row, somebody had given me some seeds and said they're called Chinese long beans. So and they need something to climb on, so I put them by the fence. And of course, they grew and climbed up the fence. Chinese long beans are a green bean that grows to be about 12 inches long, and they're delicious. So that was kind of fun to grow that bean this year. And on the other end of the garden, we planted some cabbage kind of in the foreground, And then we put in, I think, 3 plants of squash, and then we had tomatoes along the fence. And then the garden club had some leftover tomato plants from their sale. So I was kind of tight on room, but we stuck them in anyway. And by July 9th, as you can see, in about 2 weeks, the squash was thriving as well as the tomatoes. And so we learned a lesson. It was fun to grow it like this, but we're going to put the squash in a separate area. If you grow pumpkins or squash, they just need a lot of room, and they'll just go in every direction. So we'll put them somewhere else next year. Okay, I mentioned raised bed gardens, and the Park District has done a real nice job. A lot of these raised beds were built and donated by like Explorer Scouts for merit badges. I believe Lowe's built one of them, but they're very nice. Originally, they're designed for people that can't bend over to garden. So for older people, it's a real good alternative to having a regular garden. And the gardens in the raised beds seem to be several weeks ahead of the other gardens out there. But the raised beds are a great way to garden, and everything just seems to grow real well. People put fences around even the raised beds to keep the deer out, and you can see the streamers they put on the fence. Deer don't like motion, from what I understand. So if there's a slight breeze, the ribbons will flutter, and that supposedly will keep the deer away. Here's one of my favorite raised bed pictures. This was a garden last year, and beautiful lettuce, and I think those are greens, collard greens growing, and then on the far side is some squash and stuff, but really an amazing, very picturesque garden. And here's the final one, and what you see on the left is sweet peas, or I'm sorry, sugar snap peas growing on a trellis. Real nice job, and the lady that has had this garden for a couple of years just does a great job. Okay, so we got our plants growing, and it's about time for harvesting. So if you pay attention to your garden, as the summer progresses, your plants will produce. You can have fresh green beans, zucchini, broccoli in July, tomatoes, eggplant, peppers in August, onions and carrots in September. You can actually plant a second planting of peas and beans if it's early in August, and you can harvest them in late September or early October, provided we don't have a real killing frost. But the last couple of years, the frosts have come late. Okay, I'm going to show various garden plants that can be grown in the garden. You can see some of them in the background picture. Eggplant and okra, and of course tomatoes and such. This is a Roma tomato plant I had a couple of years ago, and it's one of my favorite pictures. I say that the tomatoes were growing like grapes on this plant, so I harvested them, and they flowered again, and I got even more, almost like a second harvest out of this one plant. This is a black cherry tomato plant, and it's almost hard to see it as a plant, but these things just grow crazy. And I plant a red cherry tomato, one in my garden, and I plant a black cherry in my garden. And this year, the red cherry, I would say, produced over 750 cherry tomatoes. And the black cherry is one of the best cherry tomatoes you could ever eat. It's very sweet and it's delicious. Okay, this is the last year I put squash in my garden, just because it just goes everywhere, and you can see I have onions, and they're over against the inside fence there, and it's August, and they've already kind of matured. The tops are laying down, and they're ready for harvest. And to the right of that vertical board you see there is the black cherry tomato, um, just flourishing. This is a picture in the background. You see Brussels sprouts. I don't have great success. I mean, they look great with all the leaves and stuff, but the Brussels sprouts, I don't think the season's long enough here to get a nice big Brussels sprout like you would get in the store. Then you have the okra. Okra is a very interesting plant. It's a lot of people like it. Some people don't. I like to use okra in soups. And the interesting thing about okra, you need to harvest it when it's very young and tender. If it gets to be about 4 to 6 inches long, it's too late. It's hard, it's tough, it's stringy. You might as well just throw it away. In the foreground, there's fennel, and fennel I would grow it, but I never come up with a very good use for it. And last year, my wife and I were in Florida, and we went to this Italian restaurant, and they took the bottom of the fennel and they cut it up and they put it into a salad. It has a little licorice taste, a very mild licorice taste, but it was very good. And but fennel is sometimes called Italian celery. But I'm hoping to be successful in growing fennel this year just to add to my salad. And I've even used the tops and put in sour cream for like a chip dip. It's almost like using a dill weed in your dip, but it's delicious also. A couple of years ago, the gardener next to me called me over and said, "What do you think this plant is?" It was probably 12 inches tall. And I said, "I think it's a sunflower." And so she said, "I'll leave it." Well, this is what it looked like in August, probably 8 feet tall and a big head on it. And this is one of my favorite pictures that I think I've ever taken, was this full head of that same sunflower. Okay, we're going to talk about just some general miscellaneous things here. First of all, we're going to talk about winter sowing. This year, in January, my garden club member and I took milk jugs. We cut them, opened them up. We put potting soil in, and then we mixed some seeds. And on the right, you can see the results. You just set your milk jugs outside, and they were covered with snow during the bad storms that we had here. And then in the springtime, a couple of weeks ago, we looked in there, and oh my gosh, all these lettuce seeds germinated. And so normally I try to take those lettuce plants out and transplant them into like a 6-pack, or make a lettuce bowl that would become a salad type thing. But I had put so many seeds, they all germinated, and they're really growing in there tight. So I may just take what I have and put it in the ground and just harvest it when it's ready to go. But we've had success with parsley, lettuce, and dill and also spinach. The spinach I grew turned out very nice. So it's a way to get a head start on your gardening, and you can just put it out in your backyard. And, it's nothing fancy, and or on your back deck, and this is the end result. This gardener always had a problem with weeds, and he wasn't very aggressive about going after his weeds, so he came up with a solution. This is specially designed cloth that the water will penetrate, but the weeds will not grow. So it made his life a lot easier growing like that. Don't use like black plastic because the water won't go through it, and that plastic heats up, and then the soil gets really hot, and it'll kill your plants you're trying to grow. But this is kind of a soil or a plastic mat material that is good to use with plants. I talked about weeds, and this was a couple years ago with an overgrown garden. And one of the problems, if a garden plot's not been used for a couple of years, there's a lot of weed seed in it, and that's why early on you need to stay aggressive and get the weeds out as they come up. Now, if you let them go to maturity, you can see the tassels and the weed seed right there, and it's just gonna make more weeds in the future. So I've been in my garden long enough that I've keep after the weeds, and I don't have a real big weed problem, but when I see them, I go after them and get them while they're young. Another picture of the weed overtaking a garden, and you can see there's a tomato plant in a cage over there that so somebody wanted a garden but lost interest, and that's the end result, that the weeds take over, and you go back over there and go like, nah, I don't think I'm going to put the effort in to get my garden back, and just let it go. So if you make a commitment to gardening, you need to stick with it to get the results. I mentioned a cold frame earlier. This is a cold frame that I got the design from a book. It's called Crockett's Victory Garden, Vegetable Edition, or something like that. And I believe there's a copy of it available in the Bolingbrook Library. But it's a 4x4. I have very good potting soil with peat moss and other things in there. And I start a lot of my seeds that I transfer to my garden in the cold frame. It's got a lid, so I can put it down. I even put a heating coil in it, and I can plug it in. And last year, you can see the onions. From the onions to the right side, I grew 75 tomato plants, started them in there, and then I put them into an individual pot and let them grow and the roots develop. And then I planted them in the garden, and that's what you saw in the Bolingbrook Garden tomato garden, and in my own garden also. Okay, toilet paper tube carrots. Why would one grow carrots in a toilet paper tube? Well, I met an Englishman one time, and he told me about this, and I did find it on YouTube. You take a toilet paper tube. I put a little newspaper in the bottom of it, fill it up with a potting mix, and drop a couple of carrot seeds on top, and they germinate. And carrots do not transplant well, but you can transplant toilet paper tubes. And as you can see in the picture on the left, the toilet paper tubes, you don't have to thin out your carrots. If you plant carrots and just sprinkle seed on your garden, you're going to have to thin them out. Otherwise, the carrots start twisting around each other, and it's kind of a mess. But the toilet paper tube kept the carrots nice and uniform in the garden. And normally, I'd put 3 seeds in each one and pull out the 2 and leave one that germinated and do it that way. But that's just kind of a fun thing to do, and I thought I'd share it with you. Okay. Every year, except for last year due to the pandemic, the Bolingbrook Garden Club sponsored a picnic with and invited the community gardeners. And we have it at the shelter that's near the nature center. And it's just a great afternoon. It was kind of a pitch in, and we really had a good time. Now, the one thing about this year, we're just not sure due to COVID and everything whether we're going to have it. We're just trying to keep everybody safe. But if we do, we'll invite all of the community gardeners to it. Okay, now we're to the annual Bolingbrook plant sale. The garden club has had a plant sale for many, many years, and it started out in someone's driveway, and then eventually we would rent a tent and have it over at the Brack on Lindsay and in the parking lot. And then we ended up over by the pool area. There's a big grassy area, and we had a rainstorm, and it was really flooded, and that was not a good sight. So we got moved over to the grassy area behind the War Memorial by City Hall. It rained, it flooded. So the mayor says, okay, you guys have had enough. I'm going to let you guys use the stage. So for the last 3 years, we've had our plant sale on the stage. Well, last year, due to the pandemic, we had to have a virtual sale. So we set up a store online. And the motivation we had to do that is 2 of our club members grow tomatoes, and we had 200 tomato plants that needed to go somewhere. And do you know that with the store that we set up, we sold almost all those tomato plants. And the tomatoes that our growers grow are really rare. Some of them are pretty rare tomatoes. You won't find them in a Home Depot or Menards or a garden center. And they're really excellent tomatoes. We'll have the black cherries there. We'll have the red cherries and all of that. So if you're interested, you can go. The Bolingbrook Garden Club has a web page with a link. You can also go to our Facebook page. There's a link there. And otherwise, you go to this link I have posted here, Bolingbrook Garden Club Square site, and you can click on there. We have about 700 pots of perennials of all kinds. We're going to have a lot of lilies this year, and so if you're interested in purchasing plants, both perennials, annuals, vegetables, please visit our site and order. And the pickup will be on Friday the 14th and Saturday the 15th of May. So remember us for the plant sale. Okay, it's the end of the year. Everything has been harvested, all plant material removed and composted, fencing removed, and the area is left as the gardeners found it. Because this is a YouTube presentation, I can't open up for questions, but I do have an email link. It's gardenguy60440@gmail.com. Please send me any questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. And also, if you see me at the garden and you have questions and you're driving by, don't hesitate to stop. Or if you get a plot and have questions about what to do, I'm there. And a lot of the gardeners are real friendly. They'll help you out with anything that you need. So it's the Garden Guy 60440 at gmail.com. I'm in the red shirt, and I wanted to just show a couple of my helpers, April and Cindy. Were a godsend this year. I have 3 garden plots. The garden club had 4, and that was a lot to take care of. But we would get together every 2 or 3 days, depending on if it rained or not, and we would water, we would weed, and then later in the season we would harvest. And we hated to see last season end, and we're quite anxious to get out there and get with it with the gardening for this season. I want to thank the Bolingbrook Park District for providing plots and assisting us on the plots for the pantry. The West Suburban Community Pantry, they do a great job in servicing people that need food at this point in time due to a multitude of reasons. The Bolingbrook Garden Club volunteers, we showed you a picture of a couple of them, but there's other members that pitch in and help out. And finally, I'd like to thank the Fountaindale Library for allowing me to make this presentation. Normally, I do it at the Nature Center before the gardening season, but due to the pandemic, the library was nice enough to let me do it here. And also thank Studio 300 for assisting me on getting my presentation onto YouTube so it could be shared with everybody. So that's it for now, and I hope that I've inspired you to rent a garden plot from the Park District. And if you haven't done that already, or for those of you that have done it already, I'll look forward to seeing you over to the gardens. Have a good day.